Thanks for joining us in this webinar, which is an opportunity, I think, for both the consortium partners to have a chance to discuss with possible proposers, but also for you as people interested in making a proposal to ask us questions, whether it's on the technicalities of submitting a proposal or in terms of the scope of the sorts of projects that we're seeking to support and fund in this call, but also in the second and third calls of NGI Trust. My name is Alistair Reid. I'm the project coordinator for NGI Trust, based here in Brussels. I'll give a short presentation about NGI Trust as an introduction, and then hello? Can everyone hear me, I hope?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Fantastic. And then what I suggest is that we would have 2 half-hour sessions. One, the first one on the focus of the call, topic, scope, also in terms...
זה מהות, צריך להגיע בעוד 10 דקות, הוא יתקשר.
Sorry, if you're not talking, it would be great if you can. So I hope everyone can hear me now. So the first half-hour session after the short introduction, I suggest we focus on any questions related to the scope of the call, so more on the technical aspects of your proposals. And the second half-hour session, then we'd look at questions around the applications, how we will evaluate proposals, contracting, and indeed support we'll give to projects that are funded. And then leaving a quarter of an hour as a sort of a buffer zone for any last questions and any requests that you may have for any follow-up support that you may need. So what the project is funded under the Next Generation Internet Call, supported by the Commission, European Commission under Horizon 2020. And as you can see, we have 6 partners in the project. EFIS is the coordinator. We have Gion, Fraunhofer IEO, Technalia, Cantara Initiative Europe, and EBN. So 4 partners with strong expertise in the field of internet technologies in different aspects of that, of the call area. And ourselves and EBN, who are supporting on the more overall coordination, but also outreach, intellectual property management, and so on, as we develop the different proposals that are funded in the first, second, and third calls. As you can see, we have 5.6 million euros available for third-party funding. It's our objective to spend every single euro, so we're looking to get as many proposals as we can, both in this first call, but also in the second and third calls. So if you're not quite ready now to submit a proposal, or your first round proposal is not successful, don't be discouraged. There will be a second or third call, and we will support unsuccessful proposals in terms of giving them guidance on how to improve proposals for the second or third call. In terms of the overall objectives, I won't read out every single word on this slide. You've all had a chance to look at the call text and so on. But I think the overall focus that we're trying to support here is really technologies that can improve privacy and trust for a broad range of applications. So whether it's in the government sector, whether it's in vertical industry sectors, and so on, and coming from a broad range of types of expertise. So both from, I would say, the sort of education and research sector, also from people, individuals or companies who are working on specific ideas that can improve privacy and trust for the next generation internet. One of the things that we're really seeking to get out of the NGI Trust call are projects that can either be applied or commercialized, depending on the type of project, within a relatively short time frame. So we're looking to get projects coming through, or ideas coming through, that can be implemented relatively fast. I mean, that depends on the type of technology and state of development of what you're working on. But we're really looking for things that can be applied relatively fast. And in that respect, both our project, we will support coaching and mentoring of the projects. So coaching during your project life cycle, but also mentoring in terms of support for either IPR protection or further development in terms of business planning and so on. There are a number of other projects which are supporting the open call projects that are funded through NGI. So there are so-called CSA projects, which are there to support, again, supporting additional mentoring support for those projects that we fund that are able to move towards application of their solutions that they've developed through the projects. So again, there's a lot of support here from the Commission, both through funding for the different projects that can come through the RIA projects like NGI Trust, but also in terms of sort of mentoring, coaching, and indeed future opportunities, future plans and projects that may be supported by the Commission under Horizon Europe. So it's a sort of family of projects around the NGI theme supported by the European Commission. So that's something else to keep in mind as you develop your projects. What are we looking for? We're looking, and I think this is one of the specificities of NGI Trust, is that the Commission, by funding the sort of RIA projects like NGI Trust, the aim is that our project will help, in particular, perhaps those organizations or people or individuals who are not the usual Horizon 2020 suspects. It doesn't mean we won't support organizations that have been involved in Horizon 2020, but we're very keen to mobilize, to bring into the sort of development of new ideas for privacy and trust from the next generation internet. We're trying to bring in a set of players, whether they're smaller companies or whether they're individuals or whether they're researchers and so on, who are not necessarily currently being supported under Horizon 2020. So again, something to keep in mind when you're developing projects, to see how you, thinking about the team you might put together, you can also support that broadening of the sort of people who are involved in these activities. A strong focus on human-centric internet. So it's really about trying to make the next generation internet as human-centered as possible. So we're really looking for projects that are really reaching out to support that sort of objective. Again, as I've said already, there are 3 rounds of calls. In the first call, we're looking to attract a sort of broad mix of projects, which can be either early stage or projects that are already looking for relatively advanced funding for final development of their concepts. And then in the second and third calls, we will obviously hope to both further support projects that have been supported under the first call, but also attract additional players with scalable projects. The duration of the third-party projects we fund should be between 9 and 12 months. We're flexible on that, so if you tell us, well, we think we need 15 or we only need 6, it's not a problem, but just to keep that in mind, again, it's a sort of range of the sort of period we'd expect to fund a third-party project for. The schedule for the open calls, again, just to remind you, so we have first open call is already open, as you know, with the deadline for proposals coming up quite soon. And we're aiming to contract and therefore launch the projects by the summer so that people can get down to work very, very fast. So again, the idea of these RIA projects funded by the Commission is that this is a much faster process than would be done under a normal Horizon 2020 call. The second and third calls, we'll launch a second open call on the 1st of October. We'll have a discussion in June with our advisory board and with the Commission in terms of perhaps focusing or redefining the topics for the second call, and similarly for the third call. But I mean, the broad topics that I've already presented will remain more or less in place, but we may focus down either on some verticals or on some specific topics that seem to be of interest for the second and third calls. 3 types of third-party projects we're looking to fund. to be simple, the sort of first one is a sort of feasibility type approach, so up to €100,000 in grant funding from NGI Trust, no need for matching funds. We're looking for projects that are looking to test and assess the feasibility of initial concepts, maybe not ready yet to do full development. Second type of project, execution, so up to 180,000 from NGI Trust, and we're looking for, in that case, matching funds, which can again come from either external funding that you may get from either national public funds or from business angels or external funding sources, or if you have internal resources, you can also use, obviously, your internal resources. And type 3, which would be really the projects which are ready to commercialize or to be applied, depending on the type of focus that they're looking at. We're willing to provide up to 200,000 on a matching fund basis, a 50-50. Again, these are maximum sums, so you're not obliged to go up to 200,000 for the type 3, for instance. You can ask for 150, but again, it's the sort of type of project we're looking at. One sort of key ceiling to keep in mind is that, again, this has been a decision of the Commission on Financial Services, is that any single third party, so one organization, one individual, over the lifetime of NGI Trust can get a maximum funding of €200,000. So it's not per project, it's per organization or per individual. So 4 priority topics, we'll come back to them in the discussion that will take place in the next half hour. We're looking at these 4 broad areas. Some of the questions that we've been getting in via the helpline email have been around some of these issues. Are we in? Is our idea within one of these 4 topics? Are we working too much on a topic that might be addressed better by another NGI-funded research and innovation action open call? So there are 3 others. If you check the NGI.eu webpage, you'll see the 3 other calls. And so that's something we're in the next half hour, if you've got questions around, is my project in the right area? Is this the sort of topic you're looking for? Feel free to raise those questions. So again, I won't read out the text here. You've all had a chance to read that in the call text. Again, as part of our preparation for the proposal and then the finalization of the project launch, we worked with our advisory board to look at a number of areas of what we call areas of concern that could be addressed by proposals. A number of them are listed here. Again, these are very much indicative, so you don't have to completely line your proposal up with one of these areas. You can make a very good case for additional areas or redefinition of some of these topics in your proposal. These are very much just to give you a feel for the sorts of areas that we thought the third-party projects that we fund could address through the proposal. A couple more slides and then trying to keep the time here. So the open call process and timing. So we're looking for proposals submitted by the end of April. You can submit a proposal anytime up to the 30th of April at midnight. If you've submitted a proposal and you want to make some changes, we've already had 1 case. Don't worry. We'll use the last version that you submit for the evaluation. So if you want to submit an early proposal and then think about it a bit more and come back and resubmit, as long as you're within the deadline, we'll take account of the last version you submit. In May, we'll have a meeting of the evaluation panel. So each of the proposals will be assessed by at least 2 evaluators. The evaluators are drawn from our advisory board, but also from the consortium partners. So depending on the topic of the proposal, we'll allocate the evaluation to the best people in terms of expertise for assessing your proposal. We'll draw up a list of potential projects for selection, and then in June we'll have a discussion with the Commission services who get a sort of final sign-off on the proposals that we're going to fund for this first call. Again, during June, based on that approved list of projects, we'll then move to contracting and signature of the first third-party grants, with a launch from July onwards for each of the projects that we're funding. As I said earlier, one of the things is if you're not successful in this round, we will give you feedback on the proposal where we think either we think you might be better submitting, for instance, under NGI Ledger open call or under another open call. Or we think your proposal is interesting, but we just needed a bit more detail or a bit more information to really understand the potential impact. So we will give feedback to those of you who are not successful so that you can already start preparing for the October call. As I said earlier, the projects that are funded will receive coaching. So again, normally that will be one of the people or both of the people who evaluated your proposal, because those people are the ones we consider are the most expertise in the area of your project. So during the lifetime of your project, you'll get support from the consortium. We'll have regular checks, conference calls with you to make sure that things are going smoothly. And then once the project is concluded, or towards the end of that process of concluding your project, we'll also look at expertise in terms of mentoring and support. So just to give you a sort of overview of how the project is structured. So we have the 3 rounds of open calls. We have, again, as I said, third-party coaching, but also mentoring support for the projects. We're also looking towards, if you look at the bottom of the diagram, we're looking to have a number of events which will be either face-to-face, in which case we'll ask you to make a little bit of money aside in your proposal for a meeting, either in Brussels or another location around Europe, for what we call project cluster learning workshops. And one of the things we want to do there is to really try and create a sort of community of people working on privacy and trust enhancing technologies, exchange between projects. So it's quite possible that projects will be working on related technologies. Maybe you have different pieces of a puzzle that can come together and make a stronger commercial or application development in the future. So again, we'll be providing IPR advice and mentoring as you go forward into that once you've completed your projects. And the projects will also feed into, at the very end, we'll have an impact assessment of the projects to see to what extent the projects have been successful in applying the solutions you've developed, but also looking at future opportunities. So as I said at the beginning, one of the aspects of these calls is to try and develop ideas for next generation internet under Horizon Europe, so under the next funding program. So we're looking very much to really learn from your experience, provide some showcasing of the project outcomes, but also feed into future rounds of next generation internet support from the European Commission. So I hope that's given you an overview of the way the project will run overall, but also how we will seek to fund and support you throughout the cycle of the projects. Information you already have, but just to make sure everyone has it. So there's an email for support. You can use that at any time. Fire off an email that goes to several of us in the consortium, and we try and make sure you get a response as fast as possible. So I've kept more or less the time. So I suggest we open up the floor now. So I think the objective of this webinar was very much questions and answers from the people interested in proposing. So I'm now opening up the floor. If I could ask people to speak one at a time so that we can manage the replies, but also introduce yourself when you start talking so that everyone knows who you are and where you're from. So who would like to raise the first question? If you may have to unmute yourself to talk.
Hello there.
Yes, hello.
Hi there. My name is Gilad Rosner, and I had 2 questions. The first was, so there are the 3 types of funding, where the first without matching funds, and then the next 2 models. Each round of funding, this one, the October, and the subsequent one, all three types are being solicited. It's not, you're not going in order per se. You're looking all three. You can apply as all three types on any of the open calls.
Exactly. Yes, we're not. We had a sort of hypothesis that the first call might have more projects of the first type, i.e. people trying to, using the 100,000 to think through the feasibility of their concept, maybe shorter projects that allow them to then submit proposals under the second or third call. But there's no obligation. I mean, you can submit for any of the types of projects at this stage. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then my second question was about eligibility and country of origin. Mm-hmm. And it's a two-parter. The first is UK. I know that that's a big question mark across all of the Horizon 2020 grants these days, mm-hmm. and certainly the situation, how it's unfolding, isn't helping any in terms of alleviating that ambiguity. But I was wondering if there was a position you were taking on it at the moment, and then I'll follow up with the next one.
No, you can ask the second part, and then I'll answer.
The second question was Estonian e-residency, whether that was an acceptable country of origin for the application. Okay,
so for the UK case, we had a question come in quite early about that from one of the interested parties who were proposing. And I asked a question then, I forwarded the question to the Commission services, who then took about a month to get a reply from their legal service. As you can understand, it's quite a sensitive topic. The reply to that is on our wiki page. So basically they said the usual thing, which is in the event of a no deal, which would imply no agreement either for future participation of the UK to the Horizon 2020, then that would pose a problem. My understanding, as much as I think anyone can understand, is that the UK Parliament has now more or less ruled out a no deal. So that's, I guess, a positive sign. So at this stage, we're definitely accepting proposals from the UK, and we would certainly hope that we can fund those, given the relatively fluid situation. But as I say, the UK Parliament does seem to have ruled out no deal, which is positive from that perspective. Estonian e-residency. So, I'm an Estonian e-resident myself, and our colleagues in Kantara, I think, are also. And yes, it's perfectly fine. If you have a company registered as an e-resident yourself of Estonia, it's fine.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Domenico Rotondi. Me too, I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, for a Type 2 project, it's good things to have within the proposal to also the execution of a small pilot in order to validate the approach and the technologies that are being developed?
Yes, I mean, I would say definitely if you can validate through Type 2 projects the technology, that gives I think a stronger basis for potential support under the second or third call for a Type 3 support. Then, so I think the more you can validate the technologies that you're developing, the better. So if you're able to run a pilot, that would be great. Yeah. I would also say my colleagues who are more on the technical side are also, my colleagues from the consortium would like to reply to any of these questions. I don't want to monopolize the floor here from the consortium side.
Okay, the second question is related to the total amount that can be provided to a company within the call. Mm-hmm. If two subjects belonging to the same group present two different proposals, the total amount is computed for each company or for the whole group?
So the total amount is per either organization or individual. So we accept proposals from even, I would say, individuals, people who have a bright idea. We accept proposals from companies. We accept proposals from not-for-profits or universities or whatever. And for each individual organization or person, the maximum amount over the lifetime of NGI Trust is 200,000 euros. So that means if you have 1 or 2 projects and you have 2 or 3 partners, then we will look if your second project, or if you do a second proposal in the second or third call, we will look at how much you've received under the first call, and then the maximum amount you will be able to receive under a second proposal, or a second proposal to a second or third, the second open call would then be the ceiling would be set based on what you received under the first project.
So the constraints is for each organization, even if they belong to the same industrial group.
Yes. So the call has no limitations for size of companies. So that was another question we had. So large companies can make a proposal. I'm just wondering, it's a good question. I'll note it down. I think I might have to come back and put up a reply and a frequently asked question on our wiki in terms of if the partners are from the same industrial group, whether that is a single entity or several entities. So I'll note that down, and I'll come back to you with a specific reply to that.
Yeah, I think it's Colin here from Kantara. I think we're probably going to need the European Commission to help us on that. I know that in other programs, the threshold has been 50%. So if there is a controlling interest by, shall we say, the lead organization onto the subsidiary of more than 50%, then it's counted as one. I'm not quite sure what the European Commission's rules are on this, but that I think kind of gives you a sense of what's been used elsewhere as the measure.
Yeah. Okay, but it's a good question, because we'd already had the question on the large companies, and so I think we'll ask for clarification to the Commission. I would say at this stage, if you have several proposals and you want to submit them, please go ahead and submit them, and we'll work with you afterwards to just, if both proposals are successful, for instance, we'll then work with you to work out the best solution. So again, as I said earlier, the advantage of this type of call is we can be really quite flexible in terms of the administration and avoid unnecessary bureaucracy. So we'll open sort of negotiations rather than sort of yes or no answers to you after the proposals have been submitted.
Hello, this is Alberto Crespo from Atos. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Very good. Sorry, because I missed the initial minutes for some problems of connection, so I don't know. You mentioned there was a previous question on large companies.
Yes.
So this is on the participation of large companies in making the proposals?
Yes, so we have not excluded any type of organization from the call. So the call is not restricted to small and medium-sized enterprises.
Okay. In our case, we have been in touch with Kantara, with Colin. He has provided us answers to the questions that we had to participate in the call. The last point was related to the contract that we would need to sign were our proposal to be funded. And I'm not sure if it would be possible to have such a model contract available before the call closes, so that our legal department can look at that.
Okay, so yes, we had indeed that I know that question came in. We have a draft model contract. I needed to check. I've been off work for medical reasons the last couple of weeks, so I have to check what my colleagues prepared. So I think we can share at least a draft of the contract in the coming week if that's of interest to people.
Okay, thank you very much. And then regarding type 1 and type 2, I understand that for type 2, which would be validation in the context of the addition of the proposed technology in the context of a pilot, this would require a different, it would benefit from having a different entity participating in a consortium that acts possibly as an end user and that also may help with the drafting of a business plan in relation to that technology. Is this correct?
Yeah, so I think, again, I'll let my colleagues may want to add, but I think we're very keen to see use cases. So where you can involve end users or potential end users, whether they're from the private or public or education sector, in testing or even in co-design, that's obviously something we'd be very, very favorable to.
Because it could not be covered, I mean, with, previously it was mentioned this possibility of having organization belonging to the same group or another division, for example, in order to do this validation, it should be a separate organization? Or it would be better?
I mean, I think it's, if you think there's something that, I think one of the things is the proposals should also show that they are broadly applicable. So if it's something that's sort of very proprietary to an organization, we may ask you to, to adjust a bit the proposal if we decide to fund you. So if you can show that there's a broader interest in what you're developing than, say, your single organization, that's obviously, I think, a plus.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Paul Malone, Waterford Institute of Technology in Ireland.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. My first question is about the, you said you have 5.6 million for funding. Is that evenly split across the 3 calls? Do you have individual budgets for the calls? Or are you working towards like a threshold? Perhaps could that possibly all, a larger proportion of that disappear over the first call?
We had initially again, we did a hypothesis at the beginning, but in our initial proposal to the Commission, we had 2 rounds of calls. So after discussion, we decided to do 3. So that hypothesis is already a little bit disturbed by that additional round of calls. I would say we'll obviously look at the proposals coming in for the first call. I'm assuming we won't. Well, who knows? We may get requests for 10 million euros and have to decide if we allocate everything in the first call. But I think that's unlikely. Let's say it like that. And we will definitely look at. I think even in the case that we have, let's say, 5.6 million worth of very good proposals, we'll probably think about keeping some part of the funding aside for the second and third calls. So there will be some sort of cutoff at that stage. But as I say, my guess would be that this first round we will not get 5.6 million based on what other calls we can get. 50 calls.
Okay. My next question is about type 2 projects. So I have a couple of questions about this. One is that okay, so for the one I'm looking at, we have several pilot partners which represent end users. But for what's a relatively small project, we're trying to keep a lightweight project management around that. So we'd like to say that they're not actual core partners, but that they are end users that are actually bringing resources themselves to the project, but we don't really want them as a core partner because it just adds too much overhead in terms of management and just a small project. What's your view on that?
So they would be supporting the project but not funded by the project.
Exactly.
Yeah. We don't have, again, we're very flexible. If it makes sense for the project, make the case in your proposal and we'll look at it. I don't think it's an issue for us.
So our thing is that they won't be actual beneficiaries directly in the proposal, but they'll be mentioned potentially with letters of support.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. And my next question related to that is that if the wording around the funding for the type 2 says that it is a 1/3, 2/3 kind of model. But I think it's worded in a way, if you just jump down one of your slides there.
So I'm on
here, this one. Yeah. So it says matching funds of up to 90,000, but if we have potentially matching funds of beyond that, so this gives the impression that you can have 180 up to 180 plus 90, but we potentially might have 180 plus 180 plus, if you know what I mean.
I mean, if you, again, the model we've applying here is one that Kantara used, so Colin can say perhaps a few words about how that works.
It's just my phrasing of the matching funds of up to 90,000. So if we go beyond that 90,000, are we ineligible? That's my question.
No. I mean, I think it's what we're trying to do is get maximum return for the funding from the Commission. So if we leverage more, then we're happy with that as well. So.
Okay. And then I just have a couple of other like smaller topics in the proposal. There's a section 6.2, which is the legal entity form.
Yes.
Do we need to do this if we have a PIC? I don't understand the purpose of the legal entity form if we have.
So the legal entity form is only for if I'm just looking at the legal entity form is the PIC allows us to identify you within Horizon 2020, but we assume that not all organizations would be, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to go beyond Horizon 2020 usual suspects. So that's why we ask people to provide a legal entity form, because it gives us more detail on the organization.
Okay.
If it's not usually a big issue. I mean, it's a sort of standard form for the Commission. So
yeah.
I guess your administration has probably filled that sort of form in before.
That's what I've done a request to find out if they have. So I'm trying to find it. And then
if you don't have it, again, we'll be relatively flexible. If you can't get it signed for the 30th and you submit your proposal and tell us you'll submit it afterwards, it's fine.
Okay. And then for section 6.3, which is about annual turnover the last couple of years, but what about startups and public bodies?
Okay, so for startups, we will look at, I think we've answered this question through some of the questions coming in on the support email. The core focus for ourselves is on, is this a good idea? Is this going to make a change to privacy and trust for the next generation internet?
Yeah.
The second aspect is this organization credible funder? So credible financially. So obviously for universities, public bodies, etc., generally we don't require you to fill in the overall turnover. It's enough that you're a statutory public university or whatever. Sure. For startups who don't have a full year of financial turnover, give us some figures on how you're doing, basically, I would say.
Okay. So my very last question is about the section 6.4, which is about, it's a little confusing. Is this representing the natural person who represents the lead partner?
So it's either, so it's only the lead partner that has to sign that, and either if it's an individual making a proposal, so if Paul is making a proposal, then he would fill in his ID or passport number and sign as an individual. If Paul is submitting a proposal as an organization, then it would be, I don't know, the rector of the university, the managing director of the company.
Okay.
So
Okay, that's fine.
Or it's not both.
Yep. Okay, I have it. Okay, thanks very much, Alistair. Thank you.
Okay. Good.
It's Ian Henderson.
Right.
The two questions, if I could.
Yep.
Our group is not a legal entity. So you have My Data Global, which is based in Helsinki. Obviously, it's a Finnish legal entity.
Mm-hmm.
The Scotland hub is not as yet a legal entity and may never wish to be a legal entity.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a blocker or a problem to being a lead organisation? And I'm asking on the basis that we could go other roads if that was a problem.
Well, I mean, you can. I would say then that in that case, the declaration, for instance, 6.4 would have to be signed, for instance, by yourself if it's the Scottish part that's submitting on behalf of a team. It's probably better if you have some sort of legal entity, I would say.
Right, okay.
Like that.
That's fine. And then my second question is there's two potential partners in the consortia that were put together, which are US based. Are they ruled out of any funding, or how would that work?
So the eligible partners or eligible organizations for funding should be located, in the case of NGI Trust, in either one of the EU 28 or one of the associated countries for the Horizon 2020.
Right.
The list is available somewhere. I think we put it in a link, but I can also make it available again if people need to double check that. The US, from memory, is not an associated country.
No, I don't think they're on the list. It's essentially what we're saying is the certain capabilities are only available.
Yeah, there is another NGI project which is looking at sort of exchange between the US and Europe around the topic of NGI. I'll make the information available to everyone afterwards. It's not really for project funding. It's more about exchange of personnel between organizations,
right,
as I remember. But that's possibly an opportunity. And otherwise, I would say, if you have US partners, fantastic. If they're bringing something to the project, fantastic. My understanding is we wouldn't be able to give them directly funding, but if they can contribute, then that could be, if, for instance, you could say, well, that's part of the matching funding. If they're able to get funding from, I don't know, an organization in the States to participate in the project, then we would consider that as matching funding.
Right, and can they be indirectly funded? So if a university was the lead, for example, can they commission specific pieces of work from?
So you can use yes, you can use part of your funding to subcontract work, and in that case, there's no restriction.
Yeah. Okay.
But we just ask you perhaps to give us put some clarity about that in the proposal if you intend to subcontract.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Additional questions?
Yeah, Dominic Barron. Yes. Oh.
Okay, so let's take Dominic and then.
Okay, thank you. Brief question on the type 1 type of funding that's also on the slide here. So how far can that go, the viability testing? So could there, for instance, be a prototype or proof of concept in the end, or is that too far for the type 1 funding?
No, it's Colin here. It's not too far.
Not too far, okay.
No, because at the end of the day, there was sort of quite a lot of rationale sort of running behind the scenes with the European Commission's motivation with the NGI project, and part of that was actually observations over the last several years about how work has very good research has been done, but it hasn't hit the road in anything substantial that an end user can pick up and use. And that was very much in the mind of this. So anything that takes us closer to a practical, real, tangible outcome that has the potential for mass adoption is something that NGI Trust is interested in. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Colin. And the second question is, can we include people whose names we don't know yet? So we're a smaller organization and we're hiring. I would probably include people that we did not hire yet, but that we're planning to hire over the next weeks, months.
Yeah, so again, that's a question we've had coming in via the support email. I think the response is yes, absolutely. We don't necessarily expect you to have the full team in place, particularly, as you say, if you're a smaller organization. Again, what I would suggest is that in your proposal, you make clear on the profile of the sorts of people you're going to recruit additionally. And maybe a few words on risk management about how easy it is to source that person or to recruit that person. in your view. So that's enough for us, I think, at that stage.
Great. And last question, because I have some more administrative questions or questions about the whole submission. What would be a good email contact to ask for more administrative small things that I do not want to bother the other participants of this call with?
Okay, so it's the one I've just flicked in the PowerPoint slides. You can see. So it's the NGI Trust support atlas.
Great.
So that one goes to several of us, including Brooke, who's in the call, and myself, and we try and respond as fast as possible.
Great, thanks a lot.
Okay, David Chadwick, University of Kent.
Okay.
A couple of questions. One is, if we've already done a feasibility study prior to the start of NGI Trust, do you want the strategic plan and the feasibility assessment to be in the proposal?
I would say you can do a summary of it at this stage. So I don't think there's a need to have the full study appended, but you're obviously, if you want to append full information, but we're trying to keep the proposal short so that we can get through them in terms of evaluation.
And then the second one is following up on the risk management. Where is this to be written in the proposal? There is no section specifically on that.
Yeah, we had it originally. The Commission services told us don't complicate things, so make it light. So I mean, I think yeah, if you see specific risks, please do flag them. I think it will make the proposal more credible. But we didn't make a specific section on that in the proposal template.
Okay, thank you.
I know from the chat, Stuart Young, I think, would like to ask a question.
Hi, also. It's just a question with regards to the end of the project. Are you expecting a white paper for publication?
From each project?
Yeah.
No. So what we'll have is obviously a final technical report, let's say, from each project, which is the basis for the final payment. As I put on one of the slides, I can go to it. What we'll try and do is work with the projects that are producing interesting results, hopefully all of them, to develop some case studies and also to showcase them. So where there's not any issues around proprietary information or anything like that, where we can showcase interesting results. And as I said, at the end of the whole process of the 3 calls, we'll have an output report, particularly supported by our advisory board, which will draw on all the sort of final reports of the projects, the showcasing and so on, the cluster learning workshops that we'll run to think about future opportunities. So that would probably be an overall, you could call it white paper for NGI Trust at the end, which we hope would feed into thinking for Horizon Europe and so on.
Okay, thanks very much.
Hello,
Hi
sir.
there, here with a quick follow-up call. Since you mentioned the final payment and submission of the final report, I see in the guide for applicants that it's if a project wins, then as far as payments, that it's 40% initially, then 45% after the submission of the report, and then a 15% subsequent to that. And I was wondering if you could just sort of talk a little bit about that payment schedule.
Okay, so yeah, so the payments are exactly as you mentioned. I'm just scrolling down to find the point in the application form. But basically, we provide upfront the first advance. The 15% is basically at the end is basically a form of guarantee that once we've received all the final reports, we'll then submit them to the Commission. So the Commission will have a kind of final say on the final payment. But as far as I know, the sort of process for previous calls has been quite smooth, and I don't foresee any difficulties. But it's just as we're managing public funds, we have to get a final kind of sort of green light from the Commission services before final payment. But our aim is to make sure the projects are funded upfront as much as possible, and that you get the sort of funding as smoothly as possible. Again, if for whatever reason, we'll also look at in terms of flexibility, in terms of signing the contracts. If that's funding sort of 85%, if you wish it broken down into sort of a number of smaller payments, we can talk about that as well. So if you need maybe 3 payments rather than 2 before the final installment. So again,
so I guess then the project proceeds and completes with 40% of the funding. Is that accurate? That essentially, so in essence, is a good part of the funding almost sort of paid in arrears if the 45% is paid subsequent to the final report.
Yeah, so that's what we proposed. If people, as I say, this is a first open call, and so then one of the reasons for having this question and answer is exactly to get a feel for where people find that either parts of the application form or parts of the process are not ideal. So we're very much in a listening mode here. So as I say, if in your proposal you say it as well, it'd be great to have 25% after this milestone after 6 months, rather than waiting for the 45% after the completion of the project, then that's something we're willing to negotiate and discuss with projects.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. I'm thinking from the perspective of a very, like a micro business, an SME, that 40% to sort of fund through the whole project may be challenging.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So that's again. This first call will also allow us to adjust. So aside from looking at possibly refining some of the topics for the second and third call, we'll also draw lessons from this first call in terms of the application process, the grant agreement, the grants that we give, and the way we fund and so on. So we will, I think it's very useful to get that sort of feedback. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Alasdair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Do we have to clarify the kind of IPR that will be applied on the outcomes of the project, and where to clarify these aspects? Because I didn't see any section in which to clarify if the outcomes will be openly available, will be proprietary, and so
on. So I think that we don't have a section in the proposal, indeed, on that. I think as I said earlier, the aim of the NGI Trust, as with the overall NGI initiative, is to have the development of technologies which can be as widely applied as possible. So it doesn't exclude proprietary, obviously, but we are looking for proposals that are able to, have an impact beyond one organization or one small area of Europe. So we're looking for projects that can potentially scale up and have an impact at either multi-country or European level. So if you want to
thank you.
With IPR in your proposal, that's fine. And again, it's always useful for the evaluators to get a feel. Okay. Are there other questions from participants? We haven't had many questions on the sort of areas of the topics or areas of concern, so I guess that means people are relatively clear on them. But if you have questions on that, maybe if you don't want to discuss them in an open setting like today, you're also welcome to send us emails. We've had emails coming in saying, is this sort of a project outline, this topic in line with the sort of aims of NGI Trust? And we've tried to respond as fast as possible to those sorts of questions. So if you can either ask questions today or send us an email again to the support email.
Indeed, Colin here. Alasdair, we have one of those sort of sitting in the hopper because, and it's the relationship. We haven't really discussed it, and perhaps we should a little bit more here with NGI Ledger in particular. Which was the case in point here, where that demarcation is And in this particular case, you know, not mentioning the specifics, but it was where the what the recipient was looking at the published material, interpreted where the boundary was, and what NGI Ledger actually thinks it is directly. There were two questions, and one around IPR was quite clear. The other one was a little hazier, and you know, I think we may be looking at some internal check there. Is there anything that we can say specifically, you know, with our relationship with Ledger, that might help inform folks here?
I think it's one of the topics that will, if we get proposals coming in that are on the sort of grey line between NGI Trust and NGI Ledger, then I think it's one of the things that we will, that's where the commission services and the cooperation between the different NGI projects gives us, I think, some ways of checking and thinking about, is this proposal that has been submitted to NGI Trust perhaps better to be handled via Ledger? So we will, during the evaluation and decision-making process on proposals, check, I think, run those sorts of checks. So, yeah.
Okay, but well, that's good, because that probably gives folks some comfort here that regardless of whether that question is answered before the event, you know, they should be encouraged to submit their proposal anyway, and we can potentially find the best path for it. So that's what I'm hearing. Yeah, even, you know, because I appreciate that, you know, we may have to go to the back office somewhat and discuss these things, but at least what we shouldn't do is be in a point where a potential proposer has not submitted a proposal because we aren't able to come back on the specifics of their query in time. So they should just go on. Yeah.
Yeah, and Brooke has put the email into the chat, so people can, if you haven't already spotted that, you can fire off emails to us, and we'll definitely try and make sure that you get the proposal in to the right call, and support you in terms of focusing the proposal. Okay. Are there questions or comments from participants? So we have a number of our, I'm just checking, we have a number of our advisory board members in the call as well, so they may have some things to say on terms of the scope of the topics and the sort of proposals we're looking at.
I have one other question. I may have missed this, but is there a breakdown? Forgive me if this documentation is available. Is there a breakdown of the evaluation process and a weighting of the particular elements of it?
So we do have in the application form a breakdown in terms of the sort of percentage points that we will give for each of the sort of broad areas of the application form. I'm just checking which page it's on. It's on page. Okay, I haven't found it, but I'll find it in the meantime. Yeah, sorry, page 5 of the guide for applicants. So we're looking at sort of 40% weighting for the novelty and innovation, which is section 2 of the proposal template. Expertise and excellence of the proposed team, 30%, and then project planning and value for money, 30%. So again, that's, I think, as I said earlier, our focus is really on, you know, is this something new, novel, that can actually make a difference for the human-centric internet in terms of privacy and trust technologies. Obviously, we're looking for a team of people or individuals, possibly, who have really, you know, cutting-edge knowledge and can contribute something to that innovation. And we've had quite a few questions coming in on the budget. So maybe just underline that the budget that we're asking you to give is really indicative. So what you're going to get is cash, basically. It's a grant with much less strings attached to it than you know, it's a Horizon 2020 type project. We have to do financial reporting, so we won't ask you to do financial reporting based on your initial budget. the budget in the proposal is really to give us a feel, does that make sense, in terms of the project planning and the allocation of funding to different activities? Is it giving value for money? Is that a reasonable allocation of time to each of the activities and so on? So it's not going to be used ex post to control, did you use so much for your staff cost, did you use so much to subcontract and so on. What you will have to do, because it's EU funding, is keep documentation on what you basically keep accounts of what you use the money for, in case there's sometime in the future an audit, but that's relatively unlikely. It's more likely that NGI Trust as a project itself will be audited than individual third-party projects. But so the project planning and value for money, the 30% there is to give us a feel, yes, this project is well planned, we see how they're going to implement it, and the budget, the financing requested is reasonable for the output that they've described in the previous sections.
Okay, very good. My final question, I think, unless I think of something else, but my final question is, previously I won some funding on a similar type of open call, and I had put in a set of deliverables that I said, oh, here's my deliverable, this. But when it came to the actual contracting agreement, they said, please reduce all those deliverables to 1 or 2. Do you have a similar approach here?
Yeah, I would say looking at the scale of the time scale of the project, so we're talking 9 to 12 months, a little bit less, a little bit more. We don't expect a lot of formal deliverables, and we're much more looking at sort of key milestones. We expect to have this developed by this stage. We expect to have run a pilot by this stage, and this is how we will report on the outcomes of those different activities. So we expect really, I would say, the final report, which again we will give you a template. We'll ask you to keep it short, and you can, in that case, you can add annexes based on what you've done. But we're not looking for a lot of paperwork and reporting here. So I would say keep deliverables linked to milestones reasonable within the timescale of the projects.
Okay, and would you expect an inclusion of a communication/dissemination plan as one of those early deliverables? I mean, to what degree do you expect the individual projects to perform?
No, so I would personally, I mean, again, colleagues from the consortium can jump in here, but I would avoid the sort of standard sort of deliverables of a Horizon 2020 project. So we don't necessarily expect you to do full communication on your project. It may be, particularly if you're running a feasibility and you want to have a follow-on project. We will do, as I think I showed earlier, we will do some. Just put the slide back up. We will do some case studies and showcasing of project outcomes. So we will support in terms of communication and dissemination as an overall NGI Trust project. So I wouldn't spend a great deal of time on communication, unless there's a good reason for it, because you want to reach out to user groups, etc. Then fine, that's fine. The one point you might want to keep in mind is in terms of data management and obviously complying with GDPR and so on. But you might want to put in a few words about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So, do we have additional comments, remarks, either from participants or consortium partners or advisory board?
So it's Colin here from Kantara. Just on that last point, I think it's a case of helping each other here. So you've got to give us something tangible enough that we can help promote it, that we can help showcase it for you. So that's where I think, I think it's more, it's perhaps less to do with writing and more to do with, something more tangible that we can look at, feel, watch, something in that region. I think this is not an effort in screeds and screeds of writing as a scientific journal type thing. if that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, good point, I think, yeah. As I said, I think we're really looking for these use cases that can show that it's applicable within a range of organizations or across a user group and so on. So I think if you can show that in whichever format, we prefer that probably to as Colin said, to long reports. It doesn't stop you publishing. It doesn't stop you if you're from the academic sector doing a paper, but that's not what we're looking for here, I think.
This is Alberto Crespo again from Atos. It could be that the base technology in our solution is related to distributed ledger technology or self-sovereign identities, although it would be aimed at improving identity and privacy management. And then it comes to me the doubt whether, because of using this type of technology, if there will be doubts whether we should aim it to Ledger project instead of NGI Trust.
So I don't know, Colin or other colleagues from the...
Hard to know based on that minimal amount of information.
Yeah.
You know, a point being made to us by another proposer is that certainly there's a requirement in Ledger for open source software.
Okay.
So that's so if whatever it is that you're proposing to develop is proprietary, then by default that knocks you out of Ledger as an option. If it is open, then you know, potentially it's in, but then we've got to look at specifically the requirements of Ledger. We're not really going to. I think there's not enough to go on, and I think you need to evaluate Ledger. I think that would be a reasonable thing to do, is to evaluate Ledger and decide for yourself if it is, it isn't. If you decide that it isn't, I think it's probably worthwhile putting in the proposal making a separate paragraph that says, we looked at Ledger for these reasons, and these are the reasons why we decided it didn't fit, and we proposed it here. I think that would help the evaluation from NGI Trust side a lot.
Okay, so being open source, we could apply to whichever of the two we feel it fits better, and explain it in the application why we think it is better. Mm-hmm.
That's at least from the perspective of if it's open source, you've got the opportunity to do both. Yeah, whether the rest of your proposal fits Ledger's criteria, I don't know.
Okay,
that's up for you to decide, really. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I can see one hand raised, and Robin had asked to intervene. So maybe Robin, and then the person with the hand raised, who is, I'm not quite sure, I don't see the name. Robin?
Yeah, thanks, Alistair. Sorry, I'm a bit croaky today. To come back to Alberto's question, thinking of this from a reviewer's perspective, I think what I would be looking for is something that removes any ambiguity as to why it's in NGI Trust rather than Ledger. So I think, as Colin said, it's fine to consider both, but in the proposal, if you leave it open to the reviewers to say, well, we didn't really understand why this one didn't go into Ledger, then clearly that's a potential obstacle. So my suggestion would be, first, be explicit, as Colin suggested. Say, yes, we looked at both, and this is why we considered proposing under this heading rather than that heading. And then the second one, in terms of content, would be if distributed ledgers in your proposal is actually the key function, then it might be that Ledger has a stronger call on that proposal. On the other hand, if you're proposal majors on trust in a distributed environment, and ledger is one of the examples of distribution of function, then I think trust is a strong candidate. So, for example, if you're looking at other distributed trust functions, like, for example, a distributed social network like Diaspora, and you're doing it because you think that gives the user a better trust model than a centralized so-called free service where your data is monetized, then I think there's a rationale for saying it's a distributed technology. We think it contributes to trust, and therefore we've put this under trust rather than ledger. And that, you know, I used social network as one example, but if instead of social network you said this proposal for a distributed trust system happens to use a distributed ledger, but it's really about the distribution of trust, then I think it makes sense to lean towards trust rather than ledger. But just, you know, to be explicit in the review, in the proposal, so the reviewers are clear what kind of thinking you took.
Okay, thanks, Robin.
Alice there, sorry, it's Raffaele here.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it was very low, what Robin said. I didn't catch all the conversation, all the points. Can you summarize them, please?
I think Robin has a sore throat, that's why.
Sorry for that.
He did say that at the beginning. So we have recorded it. So I hope rather than asking Robin to struggle to repeat, I think we will make the recording available. But I understood. Yeah, certainly Robin tried to give examples of where. You know, different options in terms of where you could bid under Ledger or NGI Trust. There's at least one hand raised on the screen, so I'm not sure if that was a previous hand or it's, I think, I'm not sure who it is. I don't see a name, unfortunately.
Henry Engel.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Colin. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Alistair, you mentioned earlier in your presentation the support by or help from the consortia.
Mm-hmm.
Should I understand help or support or coaching? Is that mandatory? Is that optional? Is it when needed?
Okay, so the coaching is. I mean, it's mandatory in the sense that we would like to be able to have a couple of checks with the projects during the lifetime of the project. So again, as I said earlier, the projects are relatively short duration, so we're not going to, you know, have an extravagant number of checks. But we did think it's useful to assign a coach to each of the projects that the project team leader or people from the project can bounce questions off. So that's for the coaching part during the project duration. That's something we would like to apply. The mentoring part after the end of the project. So if you develop something, it works, you've tested it with a user, and you want to either commercialize it or apply it in the government sector or whatever, either commercialize it in the private sector or apply it to the government or education sector. Then it's question of you know, if you need support, we'll provide it. There's no obligation to take IPR advice or run through a business plan if you don't absolutely need to. But the support will be there both from NGI Trust and from one of the other projects that's funded under the NGI family.
So the coaching is selected by NGI Trust, so the person or the company, and they are in contact with us prior to any start of the program. Yeah, so as I said earlier, what we'll probably do is that the people who do the evaluation of the proposals, one of those people, given that we'll put people who are the most expertise for the topic of the proposal. One of the people who evaluate the proposal will also then act as a coach during the project lifetime. Obviously, we will, you know, if there's any, I don't know, conflict of interest or issues like that, we will check before assigning a coach. But normally, everyone
in the advisory board and the project consortium, we've all signed non-conflict of interest, and we'll obviously avoid any issues like that. But again, we'll have a discussion with you about the coach. If you think the coach is not the right person, we're happy to discuss, and we'll look for another coach. But yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Do we have any other questions, comments, ideas? You don't have to run to 2 o'clock. If we've answered all the questions, it's good. So I'll take silence as everyone's asked all the questions they want to. As we've put into the last slide, I'll put it back up again. There are various points where you can get information. So first of all, you can send an email to NGI Trust support@list.giant.org. We have our Twitter page where we tweet out information every so often. And more concretely, we have both NGI Trust wiki page, so that's where we post information. And one of the things that we'll do in the next couple of days is we've been putting together frequently asked questions based on questions coming into the NGI Trust support email. So we'll consolidate those and make them into sort of standard frequently asked questions, and we'll make them available so you can check about that, and we'll tweet that out when we make it available. And also on the NGI.eu website, you'll see under the open call section, you'll see information both on NGI Trust, but also on the other open calls that are being running, and indeed on the other projects that are supporting the overall NGI initiative. So if you want to get an understanding of what else is available in terms of support and funding, please do check there. I saw a couple of quick chats coming in, questions.
Quickly, are these slides going to be posted on either of these web pages?
Yes, we'll make them available on the wiki and hopefully also on the NGI.eu website, but that takes a little bit longer because we don't manage that page directly, so we have to ask our colleagues who manage that to do it. And we hope also if the recording works, we'll also make the recording available so you can go back and check what was said. Okay, so if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank you all for your time. As I said, we're still very much there in terms of please do fire off an email to us and we'll respond as fast as possible. As I said earlier also at the beginning, if you've submitted a proposal and you want to make a change to it because you've got a brilliant idea or you've noticed a typo, please resubmit, just indicate that it's a resubmission. And we'll take into account the last submission that you make up to the deadline. So thank you very much for your time. Have a